Well, good evening, everybody. You all got quiet, so I guess it's time to start. Open your psalm books to 843 and 844. 843 and 844. These are two songs that are from the Psalms. So let's start off our services by singing these, and then we'll have a prayer before class. 843 and 844. As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longeth after thee. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. You're my friend, and you are my brother, even though you are a king. I love you more than any other, so much more than anything. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. I want you more than gold or silver, only you can satisfy. You alone are the real joy giver and the apple of my eye. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. Be still and know that I am God. 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 Let us pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for the many things you've given us. We thank you for the time that we can come together and worship you and learn more about you, learn more about knowing about you. And we do pray that we will humble ourselves so that we can be still and know that you are God, and that we will seek you and seek your ways because of that. We pray that you be with those who are sick and hurting and watch over them. We pray that you'll keep them safe and bring them healing. We pray that you be with those who are hurting for other reasons, and we especially want to pray for comfort for those who are going through a time of loss or other times of difficulties. And again, as always, we pray that if we have the opportunity as your servants to help those who are in the world around us, that we will have that opportunity and know what to do, know what to say, so that we can show people your love, show people that you are God. So we just pray that you guide us in all that we do as we try to follow your Son and come to know more about salvation. And it's in his name we say this prayer. Amen. Should put the microphone over there. So, well, good evening again, everybody. It's good to see everybody. Last week, by the way, we talked about ordering a devotional book for next year's Bible reading. So I'm just going to throw out to you what I found this week when I did a little bit of research. There are some follow-up devotional books to the One Word book. And notice I said some. There's more than one follow-up book. They've been pretty much producing them yearly ever since they did the One Word book. So that leaves us about 5. So that leaves us with a decision. And you can just kind of let me know, straw poll, of which one you think. We could go with this year's, which will be the newest one. Or we can go with the second one that came out several years ago. And the difference between the two, as far as I can tell, because I know the people putting them out, the material will be good. The difference will be price. It would be cheaper to go with the older one, though there is a price break for ordering the new one in quantities of 30 or more. So who would like to go with the second book? All right. Who would like to go with the newest book? Who has no idea what I'm talking about? No. All right. Looks like I'll just do my best to get hold of the second book, but judging by that straw poll, if anybody has some real strong feelings about that, I'll say come see me. I wanted to throw somebody under the bus, but I'm the only one up here to throw under. So come see me if you have any more questions about that, and we'll get some devotional books to help us along with our Bible reading next year. We're studying Acts chapter 24 is where we left it off. We didn't quite get all the way through chapter 24, working our way backwards through Acts. I was thinking while we were singing that song, I like my segues, and be still and know that I am God from Psalm 46:10. During this time, Paul knew Hebrew scripture. He grew up with it. He was a student of it. I wonder if he ever thought about some of these psalms while he was going through his ordeal, maybe in his private meditation and prayer life. We know from especially Romans, he quotes Psalms extensively. And so it's possible that he may have thought, okay, I need to be still and know that God's got this in control. Because if we get all the way through the beginning of chapter 23 today, there's going to be some upsetting things that happen. But before we get there, let's see. We talked about Felix wanting to get a bribe at the end of Acts 24. And we talked about how Paul ended up in Caesarea and kind of how he gives his whole explanation on what happened, the events that led up to him ending up in front of Felix, really, mostly. He gave a defense of himself, but also used the format of a Roman court to use the proper way of saying. But here's what happened, and of course, Paul is trying to get across that he was just trying to live an honest life. He was just trying to go naturally into the fulfillment of everything the Jews believed. That's one of the kind of main points he makes here is I believed in the prophets and the law, and that's why now I believe in Jesus. Side story, there's a very well-known denominational, he's a professor, he preaches, but he's a professor that grew up Jewish. And when he tells the story of how he came to his understanding of Christ, which we hope goes further than where he is currently, he said someone handed him a New Testament, and he's like, oh, no, I don't read that. And the guy who handed it to him said, read the first page. I just want you to read the first page. If you turn to the first page of the New Testament, have you ever noticed how Jewish it is? Matthew 1. The book of genealogy, that's straight out of the Old Testament, of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Paul's just saying, I understand that my Judaism led me to Christianity. And I wonder if maybe we could get more people to look at that from the Jewish viewpoint, that if they would just read Matthew chapter 1, maybe they'd come to a beginning of a better understanding of what the New Testament really is and what kind of story it really is. So Paul gives that as his defense. And before that, though, Paul was not the first to speak. The accusers got to speak first. And when we go back to chapter 24, verse 1, all right, the right thing's showing up. It says, "Now after 5 days, Ananias, the high priest, came down with the elders and a certain orator named Tertullus. These gave evidence to the governor against Paul." The Jews brought, I don't know what better term to put, a lawyer. They brought a representative, Tertullus, to stand up and state their case against Paul. So they went all as official as possible to make sure they were following the laws. But notice how Tertullus presents himself in his case against Paul. And when he was called upon, Tertullus began his accusation, saying, Seeing that through you we enjoy great peace and prosperity is being brought to the nation by your foresight, we accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Nevertheless, not to be tedious to you any further, I beg you to hear by your courtesy a few words from us. You know, it's hard and it's difficult because we already know which side we're on. We're on Paul's side. And so sometimes it's easy to look at these first few verses and be like, well, this guy is just blowing smoke. But Paul does the same thing. Now, the only thing I will say the difference is what Tertullus says versus what Paul says. Tertullus is not being completely honest and accurate. We've already gone over, if you remember, that Felix was not a nice guy. Felix was not liked by the Jews. Felix was the cause of many rebellions of the Jews during this time. And so for Tertullus to stand there and be like, most noble Felix, we're so thankful you're listening to us today. We just find that you bring us peace and prosperity. There was not a good Jew that believed that. So that's probably why we accuse him of blowing some smoke here to try to butter up Felix to make sure he would rule in their favor. But at the same time, it is pretty natural in the ancient world that when you're standing in front of an official of the high government, especially in a case where there's an emperor or a king, you're going to go through all the proper channels of saying, you know, your excellency, your graciousness, and so to a certain extent, Tertullus is doing that. But when he says you're bringing us peace and prosperity, that's where we go, okay, Tertullus, what are you getting at? And so he does eventually say in verse 4, so, you know, we're not going to be tedious with how great you are, Felix. So just thank you for hearing us. Hear what we have against Paul. So that starts in verse 5. For we have found this man a plague, a creator of dissension among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, and when we seized him and wanted to judge him according to our law, but the commander Lysias came and with great violence took him out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come to you. By examining him yourself, you may ascertain all these things of which we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, maintaining that these things were so. So, the accusation first is character. Paul's a plague, and he brings division. In fact, he belongs to that group, that troublesome group known as the Nazarenes. Why are they called the Nazarenes? No, that's it right there. Jesus was from Nazareth. All right, so this movement, they wanted to make it sound like this is out of Galilee. This is not a Jewish movement. They're trying to distance themselves from that. All right, and so that's why they're saying this is the sect of the Nazarenes that follow Jesus of Nazareth. All right, throughout Acts, there are many, many different names given for Christians. Once, it's Christian. Once. Elsewhere, you know, we saw the Way. You'll see other names. The Church of Christ is there. The disciples, the Church of God. There's lots of names in Acts in the New Testament for this group known as the Christians. And so this one's interesting. The Nazarenes. It's more rare, but it's here. He's a ringleader. It's usually not a compliment. Hey, you're the ringleader of that group. That's usually not meant to be a nice thing to say, and that is definitely what they're trying to do. So they first attack his character. This guy's a plague, a divider, and a ringleader of the Nazarenes. Oh, and we have an action he did. He profaned the temple. That's why we arrested him. He was profaning the temple. Now, spoiler, he didn't. But some believed he did. I had a man pull me aside once, and he said, perception is reality. The truth is, it isn't. And he knew that. He knew I knew that, but he knew a situation we were dealing with, and he's like, look, these people are convinced that this is the case. So their perception is reality. So even though Paul never profaned the temple, and we'll get into the exactness of how he did not do that, some thought he did. Some were utterly convinced he profaned the temple. And so they weren't going to be confused with the facts. They knew Paul had done this. And if you read Paul's defense later in chapter 24, you can tell he's trying to say, I would never do that. It's one of those interesting things. Jesus never broke the law of Moses while bringing in his own law. Paul, that I can think of, unless you can think of something I'm not thinking of, he never broke the law of Moses. Well, we're getting there. Don't get ahead of me. But in that case, we could the defense we can make. He did curse the high priest in chapter 23. The only thing I would say there is that wasn't a legitimate high priest, but that's another story.
He said himself he kept the Jewish law for the Jewish people.
Right. To become all things to all men.
Yeah, he became all things to all men.
Right.
So therefore, he even talked about taking a vow. When he took a vow.
Right.
When he was at Caesarea.
That's right. So he did a lot of things still Jewish, even though that law had been fulfilled. And that's what's interesting is that they're trying to accuse him according to Jewish law, and actually, other than maybe with the high priest thing, and maybe something else I'm not thinking of, it really seems like he tried to avoid breaking the old law as much as he could. Even it's one of those. Even though he didn't have to keep it, I don't know why I thought of it. I have heard of several Amish and or Mennonite individuals that have converted, coming to a better understanding of things, and it's interesting. The stories I've heard, there's kind of two reactions. One reaction is still the people who the person who converts still dresses very plain and leads a very simple life, and then there's the other reaction where suddenly someone's wearing all the colorful clothes they can and getting all the devices they can. So it's interesting to see that some people are like, well, yeah, I'll convert, but I'm steeped in this background, and some people are, I'll convert and I'll leave that all behind. To a certain degree, that's an opinion. That's a leeway. As long as you're following Christ and not breaking Christ's law by doing that, you have that leeway to do that. And so Paul, in many cases, was following the law. All that to say this: he did not profane the temple, but they thought he did, so they seized him. And notice what he does next. And this Roman official got in our way. We were just going to have a good old-fashioned peaceful execution, and this Roman official got in our way. Lysias is a Roman soldier in charge of the cohort of Jerusalem. We'll get more into his story in chapter 23, but it's interesting that he butters Felix up, but he also wants to blame a Roman. So Tertullus is playing a fine line here. He's playing a fine line of, we don't want to make a Roman mad at a Roman, but at the same time, we want to say that Lysias or Lysias or however you want to pronounce it, obstructed our justice system by getting involved and bringing Paul to here. So he's almost saying, the only reason you're hearing about this, we would have taken care of it. The only reason you're hearing about this is because one of your officials got a little out of hand. So that's who they're blaming. The commander Lysias came with violence, great violence, took him from our hands, and then he commanded that we would have to come here to tell you this case, and the Jews are all assenting. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Well, of course they're assenting, because they're trying to make a case against Paul. So that is Tertullus's accusation against Paul. Did you have something, Todd?
Well, he was a tribune. This was a fairly high official. Not somebody that you're easily going to be able to bring down or to cause problems from. Tribunes are over several cohorts, which, he has a lot of troops under his command.
Right. But it could be just trying to divide a wedge between Felix and Lysias to make their case. But again, it's a fine line to walk that you have to be careful with. By the way, a little side note. After going through chapter 24, what in this chapter points to the accuracy of the Bible? Did you notice it? I know we went through most of it last week, but even this week, did you notice something that just screams the accuracy of what's going on here in this chapter?
Verse 11.
Let's see. Maybe?
Well, the timing and the names and everything.
All right. So, yes and yes. So, those verse 11. Because you may ascertain that it is no more than 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem to worship. At the beginning of 24, 5 days. Now, after 5 days, Ananias. Notice there's all these names and numbers. And when you hear a mythological story, you don't usually get these type of details. You don't get these specifics. And of course, we can verify it. Not all of them, okay? We got to be careful. We don't want to overstate our case and be like, we can verify everything in the Bible. No, what's happened is we verified so much that the accuser needs to be on the defensive, not us. We verified so many things in the Bible that the skeptic of the Bible actually has to come with more information than we do to try to prove things wrong. We have found these names. We found the name Felix chiseled in, and we know he was a real person from other accounts. We found some of these names and places, and the timing is given here, and it just screams, check this out. All right, you know how Joshua, when he writes stuff, and some of the other, Moses does this a little bit too, he says, and it's still there to this day. Well, it doesn't mean it's still there now. It doesn't mean that we can go look at these things necessarily. What he's telling them is the original readers, hey, you can still go see this. It's still there. So the truth is, when we start saying, well, the Bible's full of inaccuracies, we're 2,000 years too late. All right? Suddenly in the 1800s, we got so smart, we knew that the Bible was wrong as a society. It started in Europe. All right, we'll blame them. But for 1,800 years, the Bible was upheld as being accurate, as being truthful, as having factual stories, but factual. And then in the 1800s, people started going, well, no, that can't be the case. And their number one piece of evidence is repetition. Well, if we just repeat it enough, I've finally gotten to the point where my advice is actually to ask somebody you might be discussing with who's skeptical, says, can I produce enough evidence for you? Because it's out there. There is enough evidence, but doesn't matter because some people just want to reject it. So all that to say, you can take these names and we won't find every one of them mentioned, but we'll find a lot of them, like Nazarene, like Jerusalem, like Caesarea, like Felix. Those are all things we can verify. The timing makes sense, how long it took to travel and things like that. So all these are little pieces of evidence to the accuracy of the book of Acts. One theologian said that Acts is one of the most accurate pieces of history we have from the ancient world because of how Luke wrote it. Luke put all these details in there for us. Again, some people will never be convinced. But if you want to fortify your faith, and if you do have someone willing to be convinced, go through some of this with them. And I can give you some resources if you want to know more about that. But any questions or comments on chapter 24? Yes?
It was really smart of the Jews to bring a smooth-talking lawyer. You know in this picture, somebody in today's courtroom is acting like this.
Yes.
I think that if it hadn't been for Drusilla, Felix might have acted abruptly with that. We're not told until verse 24 that Drusilla had influenced him, but Felix knew in the beginning
Right.
what it was.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
what this was all about. And that he all benefited from that.
Yeah. That Felix didn't, in this case, act rashly. maybe because of Drusilla or some other influence, because he did already know about the way, we find out later in the chapter, that probably helped Paul in this case, because quite frankly, Tertullus he's a smooth-talking lawyer, and Felix could have been convinced by that.
I'm picturing like TV commercials, or someone you know has been hit by a chariot.
Yes, Henry.
Sorry.
Somebody's a lawyer in here. Yeah, Drusilla was, she was not without influence herself. I mean, it wasn't she was just somebody. She was
Right.
the daughter of Herod Agrippa the first, right? She was,
I think so, yeah.
yeah, she had come from the royal line, and she had left her first husband to come to see Philip. Felix. Now, we don't know what Paul said to him, but he did exactly do the John the Baptist routine on
Right,
Felix.
right.
Because he knew that was, who was on his side.
Right. Yeah, because right now in chapter 24, Paul's best bet is to just keep Felix happy enough with him to keep him safe, and then we go to the next step where Festus comes in and we sweep over to Rome, which we'll find out more about that in chapter 23 and how that came about, because really chapter 23 we actually start in Jerusalem and end in Caesarea. So I had a good excuse to put a map up there. I don't know how readable it is. I tried to make it big enough. But really, we just want to start at the end of the chapter, like we've been doing, and ask the question, who, what, where, how did Paul arrive at Caesarea? So starting in verse 31, we read, "Then the soldiers, as they were commanded, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. The next day they left the horsemen to go with him and returned to the barracks. When they came to Caesarea and had delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to him. And when the governor had read it, he asked what province he was from. And when he understood he was from Cilicia, he said, 'I will hear you when your accusers also have come.' And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium." So really, this is just all the background of why we ended up in Caesarea. He was brought by soldiers, and we'll find out more why that's the case earlier in chapter 23. He came to Antipatris first, and then went the rest of the way to Caesarea. And again, hopefully that's visible on the map. It looks like it is. And then, let's see. They go to, there's horsemen that go to a barracks. So all this official stuff. They're in Caesarea. And they delivered a letter. We're going to talk about that letter in just a minute. And so the governor, Festus, read this letter and got to meet Paul. And he says, "Oh, okay, Paul, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you from?" "You're from Cilicia." Almost wonder if this might have been like, remember Pontius Pilate with Jesus? So, now, you're a Galilean? When he finds out he's a Galilean, what does he try to do? Pawn him off to Herod Antipas. "I'm going to send you," okay, you're a Galilean. That's Herod's jurisdiction. I'll send you there. And maybe he'll take care of this for me, because Pilate was constantly trying to get rid of this problem. All right. So I almost wonder if maybe Felix is trying to do the same. And he's like, "Oh, from Cilicia. Okay, I'll hear your case." By the way, it's not on this map. If you go back to your Bible maps at the back of your Bible, where modern day Turkey kind of comes into the rest of the Middle East, you know how it kind of juts out there? There's a little coastline there. So the way to find Tarsus, where Paul was from, is it's on top of the Camel's Hump. Trust me, it's there. Look at your maps, and you'll see a little camel head. The ocean sticks into part of Turkey there, like a little camel's head. And then you go back, and there's a hump on the coastline, and on top of that hump is where Tarsus is. And that's the best way I know to find it for Bible geography nerds like me. So that's where he's from, and Felix is like, "Okay, I'll hear your case when your accusers have come." And he's kept at Herod's praetorium. Boy, that's, again, you talk about just these little notes that we could just read over and not realize the significance. Caesarea was pretty much the major port for the region of Judea, Samaria, and Galilee. Do you know who made it a port? Take a guess. We just said his name. Herod the Great. Herod the Great dug out the water there so that he could build a deep sea port there to bring in shipping and seas. That's why, I say Herod the Great is somewhat a misnomer because he did so many bad things, but he was a builder. He was an architect. And so he built up Cilicia to be a port. So basically, Paul's being kept in a palace that was built by Herod, a hall that was built by Herod because Herod was trying to make Caesarea a port. Judea does not have a natural port. The coastline there doesn't allow for it. And so Herod's like, well, if we want to trade with Rome, if we want to be an upstanding part of Roman society, we got to have a port. And so Herod chose Caesarea and made it a port. That's just a little interesting nod to Herod's influence, and that Herod, the first one, all right, to his influence on all of these things that were upwards of 45, 50 years after Christ at this point, maybe more. And Herod's name still widely known. So anyways, that's a little side note. Now, Lysias, again, pronunciation, I am not, in this case, a Latin professor, so I can't tell you the exact pronunciation, so I'll probably switch back and forth. But he is the soldier that is involved in this storyline. And so we're going to get his case of what happened, his story, his side of the story, starting in verse 23 of Acts 23. And he called for 2 centurions, saying, prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide mounts to set Paul on and bring him safely to Felix the governor. He wrote a letter in the following manner. So, first of all, we're going to find out why, they are going to send a small army to take Paul to Caesarea, and there's a reason for that. So we'll find out why later or earlier in chapter 23. But before we get there, verse 24, he's going to send Paul with a letter. This is the ancient text, phone call, email. They didn't have those things, so Paul's going to arrive with a letter saying who he is and why he's coming. Verse 26, Claudius Lysias, to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. More things change, the more they stay the same. So notice how this letter starts with just simply, Dear Felix. But it's a business letter, so we also had to say, Dear Felix, I'm Claudius Lysias. I mean, it's a formal letter here, just like we have today. Okay, let's read what he says. Verse 27. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. Coming with the troops, I rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman. And when I wanted to know the reason they accused him, I brought him before their council. I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but had nothing charged against him deserving of death or chains. And when it was told me that the Jews lay in wait for the man, I sent him immediately to you, and also commanded his accusers to state before you the charges against him. Farewell. He didn't sign it. Anyways, the simple letter is, hey, this man Paul that I'm sending up to you, he was seized and because he was about to be killed. In other words, there was an uproar around the temple, and I had to step in because the truth is the Jews couldn't execute anybody legally without Roman permission. Like it or not, it was or not for them. They couldn't just enact their law lawfully over the law of the Romans. All right? Rome was the law of the land. I wonder, we always focus on how Paul wrote Romans 13 under the guise of, these awful emperors and stuff. At the same time, a few times the law helped him and protected him. And so this may be one of those cases. So he was about to be killed at the temple. So I rescued him. I found out he was a Roman. Lysias may be making sure he presents the story when we get to it the best way possible to make himself look good. I stepped in. I wanted to know what was going on. I took him to their council. I found out they had no reason to accuse him. However, they were going to assassinate him. They had a plot to assassinate him. So they were going to kill him at the temple. When that didn't work, they were going to kill him another way. They had another plan. So he's like, when I found that out, basically, Lysias says, when I found that out, I decided this was going way over my head. You know, that's nice. Nice that Lysias has this avenue to say, this is beyond me. This is above me. I am sending it to a higher level. And so that's why he gets it out of his hair in Jerusalem. There also is a hope. It's a false hope, but it's a hope nonetheless that, hey, let's remove this from Jerusalem. Because everybody's heated in Jerusalem. Let's get this out of Jerusalem on a neutral site, and maybe things will calm down sometime. You know, there's always that hope that maybe time and neutrality can prevail. And so maybe Lysias was just trying to keep the peace, because Judea right now is a tinderbox. Judea's situation is they are ready to revolt at the drop of a hat, and they're going to prove that over the next decade from when these events are happening. So, go ahead, Richard.
Well, I worked for a guy not too long ago. He had a philosophy of living all major decisions off as long as you can.
Yeah.
So you think maybe that's at least one of these. It's more like passing the ball.
Yes.
Ball to somebody else.
Right.
Just pass it off.
Right.
And it's like if he wasn't Roman, this would be a lot easier.
Right. Oh, yeah. If he wasn't Roman, just get rid of him.
Let him have it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because that's essentially what happens to Jesus. He's not a Roman, so Pilate's finally like, okay, I'll wash my hands of this.
So Paul's not picked by accident like Christ, by the way.
That's true.
There's a whole lot to this.
If you go back to Acts 9, Christ obviously had a plan for him.
Very purpose.
Right. Yeah, and that's definitely the case. But and that's the thing, even though they're playing past the Paul, at some point someone has to make a decision. And that's really, I mean, we're to chapter 23, the game of past the Paul continues to chapter 28. That's what we've been reading all along as we've been going backwards through Acts. They're still playing the game. We just put together from tradition in his letters later what probably happened to him after this. So, Todd?
Well, and we tend to overlook how serious the situation is. This is a significant portion of the garrison in Jerusalem, at least from what we can reconstruct historically, being escorting one prisoner up to Caesarea, and once again, you know, revolt is likely to break out at any time, and I'm
Yeah.
going to maybe try to keep the peace, but I'm using a lot of manpower to do it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it ironic we named one of our missiles the Peacekeeper? You know, that's exactly what's going here. Pax Romana was Pax Romana because they basically said any unrest, any lack of peace, we are going to put down. And eventually that's what's going to happen to Judea. The unrest is going to become so large that eventually Rome's just going to say, forget it, and wipe them out. So, but there again, that's within the next decade. Right now, it's, hey, let's see what we can do to use diplomacy first with 200 soldiers protecting Paul. All right? And let's go ahead and do this because we're obviously alluding to it. So let's look at the plot against Paul, verse 17. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell him. So he took him and brought him to the commander and said, Paul the prisoner called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to say to you. Then the commander took him by the hand, went aside, and asked privately, what is it that you have to tell me? And he said, the Jews have agreed to ask that you bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire more fully about him. But do not yield to them, for more than 40 of them lie in wait for him, men who have bound themselves by an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him, and now they are ready, waiting for the promise from you. So the commander let the young man depart and commanded him, tell no one that you have revealed these things to me. So essentially, someone came and told Paul the plot. Many of you probably already know who it is, but we'll get there in just a moment. So somebody came and told Paul. Paul's like, okay, we need to go to the commander. So you go. You know, tells the soldier guarding him, have this young man go tell the commander what was just told me. That's probably Lysias or Lysias, or if I don't think about it, I can pronounce it. Anyways, go to him, and the young man says, hey, the Jews have made a vow 40 men have said, I will not eat or drink again until Paul is dead. And so, because they made that vow, they were going to kill Paul. They were going to say, bring him down to the council so we can hear him again. He'd already been to the council the day before. Bring him down so we can hear him again, and where they were going to ambush the entourage arriving. That probably would have been the start to at least civil unrest, if not civil war, or rebellion. Because who was bringing Paul down? Romans. To get to Paul, 40 men to get to Paul, what would they have to go through? Romans. How's that going to go? If they're successful, the full power of Rome is going to come down on them. If they're not successful, the full power of Rome is going to come down upon them. They were not thinking very clearly. By the way, there's a lesson of just be careful how rashly you act. Because, always said, I you got to be careful when out of passion, anger, or whatever it is, you're like, I'm going to. I learned real quick not to tell my parents, well, I'll never tell my kids that. Because what do we end up doing? I'll never forbid my kids from doing that. Yeah, right. All right. Yeah, I got that out of my language really early on because I just kept thinking, I'm not going to make those kind of promises. All right? Because it's rashness that says that. These 40 men acted very rashly taking this vow and did not think, well, and that comes back to this point. And what next? When you're thinking these things in your life, in the church's life, in your Christian life, in your spiritual walk, you got to ask yourself, and what next? By the way, if you ever want training on how to think more ahead, start playing chess. There are apps that will teach you how to do it. All right, because it forces you to think ahead. When I'm not always in the habit of playing chess, but when I am, I notice I think ahead more. Anyways, think ahead. And what next? These men didn't think about that because they were going to die. Their friends and family were going to die. Rome would have destroyed them at that point instead of 10, 15 years after this point. They'll still get there, but they delayed it a little bit longer. So, Todd, did you have something?
Well, it goes to, once again, we overlook the fact that this tribune sees this as a credible threat. Why? Because this kind of thing had happened before. The zealots were doing all kinds of things, and this was not out of the question.
Right.
And to answer your other question, the Roman general Viperian would have been sent about 10 years early.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
would have finished
Yeah.
Jerusalem.
Yeah, it may have been a different general, but there would have been a general there, definitely. But there again, this starts telling us why Lysias was acting the way he was acting, because the truth is even though the Roman army would take it out on Jerusalem, if this happened, if they were successful in assassinating Paul or attempted to assassinate Paul, at the same time, Lysias would have lost his position too. So there's some self-preservation going on here that he is going to make sure Paul gets safely to Caesarea, and that's let's see. So that gets us to, again, who is this young man? Verse 16. So when Paul's sister's son heard of their ambush, he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. This is Paul's nephew that discovers the plot that was going to be happening. So we don't know why he had the freedom to move about. We don't know, was he ignored? How did he know this was going? We don't know, but this was Paul's sister's son that was able to report the ambush, and he goes straight to Paul when he finds out. Now, backing up a little bit further, verse 11. But the following night the Lord stood by him and said, "Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome." Interesting. Jesus comes to Paul and says, you're going to make it to Rome one way or another. Now, again, I fully believe one way or another he was going to make it to Rome. However, when we get to, where does he appeal to Caesar? 25 or 20, 25, when he appeals to Caesar. I'm wondering if that's Paul saying, well, there it is. There's the way. But we started off tonight by saying, you be still and know that I am God. There it is. Paul, I got a plan. There it is. Got a plan for you, Paul. You're going to make it to Rome. So be of good cheer, Paul, for as you've testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome. And when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. Now there were more than 40 who had formed this conspiracy. They came to the chief priests and elders and said, we have bound ourselves under a great oath that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul. Now you, therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that he be brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him, but we are ready to kill him before he comes near. So that's the plot. And they go to the high priest and say, ask for him again. By the way, anybody know what party of Jews or what sect of the Jews were the high priestly family from? Well, this high priestly family. You're right, it did vary. These are Sadducees. We don't know who makes the vow. But this vow is in the form, it is not exactly, but it is in a similar form to the Nazirite vow. It's not a legitimate Nazirite vow, we know. Okay, don't get distracted by that. Who would be more likely of the sect of the Jews to make a vow like that, in that style? I will fully admit I am entering the realm of speculation. But it's the Pharisees. And how did the Pharisees feel about the Sadducees and vice versa? They're best buds. No. They were bitter enemies. They had literally gone to war with each other over their interpretations of Judaism, literally killing each other over how to interpret the law of Moses. So it's really interesting that it is possible that these two groups are having to work together because they have a common enemy, and that enemy is Paul. Of course, we know ultimately that enemy was Christ, and that's a big problem. So we don't know that the people who made the vow were Pharisees. We do know the high priest were Sadducees, and what we're not going to have time to get to tonight is already Paul was playing the Pharisees against the Sadducees. He'd already done that, preview for next week. All right, he'd already actually said, hey, you guys are fighting me. You don't even get along. You don't agree with each other. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about your problems with each other instead of your problems with me. We need to be careful just because we might perceive we have a common enemy with something in the world, somebody in the world, some party in the world. That doesn't mean we want to roll over on the true beliefs of the Bible just because we think we might be able to overcome a perceived common enemy. Don't water down the message of Christ with the messages of the world because I like the outcome. That's one of the worst things you can do. And again, Pharisees and Sadducees, even if these aren't Pharisees, they are trying to work together to stop Paul. So we'll get more into that next week in the first 10 verses of chapter 23. But are there any other questions, comments, Sadducee jokes? No Sadducee jokes. Okay, well, that's your homework for next week. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Yeah, at that, we're going to ring the bell. Let's turn off the live stream, and then we'll make some announcements and have a closing prayer.